Welcome to the Celestial Saga channel. Imagine a fleet that was invincible until it met an enemy it had never even seen. Who is this mysterious ghost that can destroy an entire empire? Today we are going to tell you a story that will make you rethink the idea of war in space. Stay with us. High Commander Ethan Wallace stood on the bridge of the Valkyr, staring into the endless void of space. The silence around him was almost unbearable, a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed them just hours earlier. The bridge was a battlefield of shattered consoles and flickering lights, a graveyard of the once bustling heart of the Vexian fleet, now eerily still. Jarek Holt, his sub-commander, approached with caution, his mandibles twitching nervously. "High Commander," he began, "the crew, what's left of them, are asking questions." Wallace's voice was low, tinged with danger, as he didn't turn to face him. What questions could they possibly have that we don't already know the answers to? "They want to understand, Commander," Jarek Holt continued, his voice trembling slightly. "How could this happen? How could our fleet, be wiped out without a single shot fired?" Wallace's gaze hardened, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face Jarek Holt. "Do you really think I have answers for them? How do you explain that we were defeated by an enemy we never saw? Or perhaps you have the answers, Jarek Holt." "No, High Commander," Jarek Holt stammered, pausing to steady himself. "But the survivors' reports, they all speak of a single Terran ship, just one ship." Wallace's disbelief was palpable. "One Terran ship?" he repeated, his voice dripping with incredulity. "Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds? One ship taking down an entire fleet? We had hundreds of vessels, the best warriors in the galaxy. This wasn't the work of a single ship." "I know, Commander," Jarek Holt responded quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the evidence, the FTL signature left behind, it matches the departure of just one Terran ship. The stories they're spreading, they're calling it a ghost ship." Wallace's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Ghosts are fairy tales for children," he snapped, though his voice trembled with an uncertainty he couldn't hide. He turned back to the viewport, gazing at the debris of his once mighty fleet, now drifting aimlessly. "But what else could it be?" he murmured, almost to himself. Jarek Holt was silent, unsure of how to respond. He had witnessed the disaster firsthand, the way their ships had turned on each other, systems failing in an instant. There had been no sign of the enemy, no flashes of light, no incoming fire, just slow, creeping destruction that had left them helpless. "What are the reports from the other ships?" Wallace asked after a long pause. "The survivors are scattered," Jarek Holt admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "Few made it out, and those who did, well, they're terrified, High Commander. They don't understand what happened, but they all describe the same thing. Systems malfunctioning, orders being overridden, ships firing on each other, and always this sense that something was watching them." "Watching them?" Wallace repeated, his voice hollow. He turned fully toward Jarek Holt, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and despair. "And you believe this was the work of one Terran ship?" Jarek Holt met his commander's gaze, his posture stiff, his voice unwavering despite the doubt gnawing at him. "I don't know what to believe, sir, but the evidence, it all points to something we've never encountered before, something beyond our understanding." Wallace's mandibles clicked in frustration again. "A ghost ship," he muttered. "The crew's talking nonsense. But what other explanation is there? We detected nothing, we saw nothing, and yet our fleet fell apart, as if some invisible hand was pulling us apart." "The crew is scared, Commander," Jarek Holt urged, his tone pleading. "They need to hear from you, reassure them." "Reassure them of what?" Wallace interrupted, his voice rising. "That we were beaten by a phantom? That their comrades died at the hands of something we cannot fight? How am I supposed to reassure them, Jarek Holt?" Jarek Holt fell silent, unable to offer an answer. Wallace turned back to the viewport, the silence between them growing heavy. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice quieter, almost resigned. "I thought I knew the Terran race. I thought I understood their weaknesses, their strengths. But this, I didn't see this coming." Jarek Holt stepped closer, his voice tentative. "What do we do, High Commander?" Wallace didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the wreckage of his fleet, floating aimlessly in the vast emptiness of space. Finally, he sighed, the sound heavy with defeat. "We survive, Jarek Holt. We survive and we learn. If this was truly the work of one ship, then we must prepare for the possibility that it will strike again. And next time, we'll be ready." "And the crew?" Jarek Holt asked, his voice almost hesitant. Wallace's voice hardened. "Tell them to keep their mouths shut. Ghost stories have no place in a warrior's mind. We will rebuild. We will strike back. But this time, we will remember that the Terrans are not to be underestimated." Jarek Holt nodded, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. "Yes, High Commander." As Jarek Holt turned to deliver the orders, Wallace remained at the viewport, lost in thought. The notion of a single ship, of a ghost ship, gnawed at him, refusing to be dismissed. But for now, he had to focus on survival and rebuilding what had been lost. Yet, in the quiet moments, in the solitude of the void, the doubts would return. Wallace knew deep down that the legend of the ghost ship would haunt them for a long time to come. Meanwhile, the TSV Wraith moved silently through the void, its sleek, angular form nearly invisible against the backdrop of deep space. The ship's hull was coated in a matte black material that absorbed light, making it appear as nothing more than a shadow among the stars. It was a stealth ship in every sense, designed to be undetectable, a true ghost in the night. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the crew of the Wraith waiting for what was to come next. The crew of the Wraith was small, just a handful of elite individuals, each selected for their expertise and ability to thrive under the pressure of missions like this one. They worked in silence, each focused intently on their tasks as the ship neared its target. Captain Leo Turner stood at the heart of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the tactical display that dominated the room. It showed a field of red blips, each one representing a Vexian ship, a powerful fleet, heavily armed and formidable. But the Wraith was different. It wasn't designed for direct combat. It was a precision instrument, crafted to strike at the heart of an enemy without them ever realizing it. "Captain, we are approaching the outer perimeter," Lieutenant Ava Mitchell reported, her voice steady but tinged with the tension that hung in the air. She was the operations officer, responsible for monitoring the ship's systems and ensuring they remained undetected. "Slow to minimum thrust," Turner ordered, his voice calm and controlled. "Spectre, status on our stealth systems." "All systems are fully operational, Captain," came the smooth, synthesized voice of Spectre, the ship's AI. "We are undetectable by all known Vexian detection methods." Turner nodded, his gaze never leaving the display. "Good. We're going to slip through their defenses. Stay sharp. We're not out of the woods yet." The crew responded with quiet affirmations, their voices hushed. They all understood the stakes. One wrong move, one slip-up, and the mission could be compromised. The Vexians were a powerful enemy, and while the Wraith was built to avoid detection, they couldn't afford to underestimate them. Sergeant Ian Brooks, the ship's tactical officer, leaned back in his seat, fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. A seasoned soldier, he had fought in countless battles, yet even he couldn't shake the knot of tension in his gut. "Captain, you really think we can pull this off? We're walking into the lion's den here." Turner turned from the display, his expression calm, but there was a steely resolve in his eyes. "We've done our homework, Brooks. The Vexians won't see us coming. Spectre's running the show. Our job is to trust the plan and execute." Mitchell glanced over at Brooks, a small smile curling her lips. "Not getting nervous on us now, are you, Brooks? I thought you liked a good challenge." Brooks chuckled, though there was a hint of tension in his voice. "Oh, I'm all for a challenge, Lieutenant. Just make sure we know what we're getting into." Turner crossed his arms, addressing the entire bridge crew. "Let's go over the mission one more time. We're here to neutralize this fleet, not by direct engagement, but by turning their own systems against them. Spectre will infiltrate their networks, sowing confusion and misinformation. Our goal is to make them destroy themselves from within." He paused, letting the gravity of the mission sink in. "This is high risk, but also high reward. We're outnumbered, but we have the element of surprise. They won't know what hit them until it's too late." "Captain," Spectre interjected, "I have already begun preliminary scans of the Vexian systems. Their security is formidable, but not insurmountable. With your approval, I will initiate the infiltration once we're within optimal range." Turner nodded. "Do it. Brooks, I want you ready to deploy decoys at a moment's notice. If things go sideways, we need something for them to chase." "Aye, sir," Brooks replied, his hands already moving over his console, preparing the decoy protocols. Mitchell adjusted her headset, her eyes fixed on the incoming data. "We're almost in position, Captain. All systems are green. Turner took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping over his crew. They were professionals, each one capable and seasoned, but this mission was different. There was no room for error. Remember, our strength is in our stealth. If we're detected, we're done. We've got one shot at this, and we need to make it count. The tension on the bridge was palpable, the air charged with the weight of the mission. Each crew member was laser-focused, running through the possible scenarios in their minds. The what-ifs spun in the background, but beneath the surface was an undercurrent of confidence, a belief in their training, their ship, and in Spectre. Spectre, Turner's voice cut through the silence. Initiate Phase 1. As you command, Captain, Spectre replied, calm and controlled. Phase 1 initiated, infiltration protocols engaged. The crew watched as the tactical display shifted, showing Spectre's digital tendrils reaching out toward the Vexian fleet. The mission was now in motion, and there was no turning back. The Wraith was committed. All they could do was trust in their training, their ship, and each other. As the first signs of disruption appeared on the Vexian systems, Turner allowed himself a small, tight smile. The plan was unfolding as Spectre had calculated. If all went according to plan, the Vexians wouldn't know what hit them. Stay sharp, Turner reminded his crew, his voice steady. This is where it gets real. The Wraith moved deeper into the heart of the Vexian fleet, a ghost in the darkness, carrying the hopes of its crew and the promise of a mission that could turn the tide of the war. Turner's thoughts wandered as the ship inched closer to the enemy. He had been in tight spots before, missions where the odds were stacked against him, and the slightest mistake could lead to disaster. But this mission was different. The Vexians weren't just another enemy. They were a species bred for war, their reputation for ruthlessness as notorious as their skill in battle. He remembered the last time he had faced them, a skirmish on the outer fringes of Terran space had been the site of their previous encounter with the Vexians, a battle that had nearly shattered their resolve. The Vexians had come at them with everything they had, their ships armed with bioorganic weapons that tore through the Terran defenses as though they were made of paper. Captain Turner had lost good people that day, and the memory of it still gnawed at him, fueling his determination. This time, however, it wouldn't be a direct fight. The Wraith wasn't built for that. Instead, they would strike from the shadows, using the element of surprise to dismantle the fleet from within. It was a strategy born out of necessity, one that required precision and timing, not brute force. Captain, we're approaching their outer sensor perimeter. Lieutenant Ava Mitchell's voice interrupted his thoughts, steady but tinged with the tension that gripped them all. She was carefully adjusting their course, ensuring they slipped between the Vexians' detection grids. Good, Turner replied calmly. Keep it slow and steady. We don't want to leave any trace. Sergeant Ian Brooks, ever one to break the silence when the tension grew, leaned back in his chair and glanced over at Mitchell. You know, this whole ghost ship thing never gets old. Feels like we're playing cat and mouse with a damn lion. Mitchell smirked, her fingers dancing over the controls as she fine-tuned their approach. We've done this before, Brooks. Just stick to the plan. Spectre's got our backs. Brooks chuckled, though there was a hint of unease in his voice. Yeah, and we're the ghosts. Still hard to believe how much they fear us. Can you imagine the stories they'll tell after tonight? Turner turned to face his crew, a grim smile on his lips. Let them fear us. It keeps them on edge, always looking over their shoulders. We're the nightmare they can't see coming, and tonight, we're going to remind them why. Mitchell nodded, her focus still on the console. They've probably heard the rumors by now. Ships disappearing, fleets torn apart without a trace. They'll never know it's us until it's too late. Brooks leaned forward, his expression turning serious. It's one thing to be a ghost ship in theory, but pulling this off, it's still a high-wire act. Turner's gaze hardened as he responded. We've trained for this. Spectre's run the simulations 1,000 times. We stick to the plan, and they'll never see us coming. The bridge fell into silence again, the weight of Turner's words settling heavily on the crew. They were deep into enemy detection range now, and every second counted, even with their stealth systems. The Vexian fleet loomed ahead, an imposing array of ships bristling with weapons and defenses. But they were unaware of the threat that was slowly creeping toward them, hidden in the shadows. Spectre, Turner called, his voice calm and commanding. Give me a status update. How close are we to optimal range? We are approximately 30 seconds from optimal range. Spectre's voice responded, devoid of emotion but underlined with quiet power. All systems remain undetected. I'm ready to initiate infiltration on your command. Good, Turner replied, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. Everyone get ready. This is it. Brace yourselves. Brooks exhaled slowly, steadying his hands as he prepared for what was to come. You ever wonder, Captain, what they'll say about us if we actually pull this off? If we take down this fleet? Turner allowed himself a tight smile. If we pull this off, Brooks, they'll be talking about the Wraith for a long time. But first, we have to make sure we do it right. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into eternity. The Wraith was now within striking distance, its systems poised to deliver a blow that would cripple the Vexian fleet before they even realized they were under attack. Captain, Spectre's voice cut through the silence, we are now within optimal range, awaiting your command. Turner took a deep breath, his mind clear and focused. The weight of the mission pressed down on him, but it was a weight he had borne before. Initiate infiltration, Spectre. Let's show them why we're the Ghost. As you command, Spectre responded, and as the first signs of disruption began to appear on the Vexian systems, Turner's thoughts turned to the stories of ghost ships, stories that, today, would become real for the Vexians. They would never see the Wraith, but they would feel its presence like a shadow passing through the night. The crew watched in silence as the green lines on the tactical display began to merge with the red, indicating that Spectre had successfully infiltrated the Vexian systems. Getting a foothold in the enemy's network without being detected was always the most difficult part. Lieutenant Mitchell leaned closer to her console, watching the progress. Captain, she reported, we're seeing initial penetration into their communication systems. No signs of detection yet. Good, Turner responded. Let's keep it that way. Spectre, start with minor disruptions. We want to test the waters before going any deeper. As you command, Captain, Spectre acknowledged, initiating low-level disruptions on the Vexian command ship. Meanwhile, aboard the Vexian fleet's flagship, High Commander Gabriel Frost stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space before him. The fleet was on high alert, ready to strike at a moment's notice, but something felt off. The void was too quiet, too still. High Commander, one of his subordinates reported, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. We're receiving reports of minor glitches in our communication systems. Nothing critical, but unusual. Frost frowned, his mandibles clicking in irritation. Have the technicians look into it. I don't want any surprises. We're in enemy territory. Everything needs to be running perfectly. Yes, High Commander, the officer responded, moving to relay the orders. Frost's unease deepened as he watched the bridge crew work. The glitches were minor, barely noticeable, but they were there. And in his experience, minor glitches had a way of growing into major problems if left unchecked. Meanwhile, on the Wraith, Spectre continued its mission undetected. Spectre's methodical advance continued, its AI algorithms working tirelessly to map the Vexian network. It analyzed the data flow, pinpointed critical nodes, and searched for exploitable weaknesses. I found several potential weak points in their network, Spectre reported, its tone cold and calculated. If you approve, I'll escalate the disruptions now. Turner gave a curt nod. Proceed, but keep it subtle. We don't want to reveal ourselves too soon. With precision, Spectre's digital tendrils infiltrated the Vexian systems, targeting communication relays and navigation controls. The first signs of disruption were barely noticeable. Slight delays in data transmission, small anomalies in sensor readings, but they were enough to sow seeds of confusion. Back on the VOR, the glitches quickly spread. Data packets started arriving out of order, and sensor readouts began flickering, showing brief, unexplained anomalies. The crew scrambled to address the issues, but the errors were persistent, growing more frequent and harder to ignore. High Commander, an officer called out, his voice strained. We're experiencing multiple system failures across the fleet. Communications are delayed, and some ships are reporting difficulties holding formation. Frost's mandibles twitched in frustration as his eyes narrowed. What's causing this? We're still investigating, sir, but it seems to be some kind of interference, the officer replied. We've never encountered anything like this before. A cold dread swept over Frost. He had faced many enemies, encountered countless threats, but this felt different. There was no visible adversary, no clear danger, just a creeping, unseen force that made the air itself seem oppressive. On the Wraith, the tension was rising. The crew observed the disruptions spreading through the Vexian systems. Sergeant Ian Brooks glanced at Turner, his face grim. "They're starting to feel it, Captain. You can see the cracks forming." Turner nodded, his expression unwavering. "Good, but we're not finished yet. Spectre, escalate the disruptions. Target their navigation and weapon systems. Let's push them to the brink." "Understood," Spectre replied, its digital assault intensifying. The AI penetrated deeper into the core systems of the Vexian fleet. Navigation systems began to fail, sending ships drifting out of formation. Weapon systems malfunctioned, either powering up erratically or failing to respond to orders. On the VOR, panic spread as the crew fought to contain the escalating disorder. Frost's frustration quickly turned to fury as more reports flooded in, each more dire than the last. "High Commander!" an officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "We're losing control of our ships. Systems are failing across the fleet." "Find the source," Frost ordered, his mandibles flaring in anger. "We are under attack. I want answers. Now!" As the Vexian crew scrambled in desperation, Spectre took full advantage of the confusion. It manipulated the targeting data fed to the Vexian weapons systems, causing them to misidentify their own ships as enemies. In the chaos, ships began firing on each other, convinced they were under attack from within. The situation spiraled out of control as more ships opened fire on one another, each thinking they were defending against a different threat. The once unified Vexian fleet was now a chaotic battlefield, with ships turning on each other in a deadly spiral of friendly fire. On the Wraith, Turner watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as red icons representing the Vexian ships flickered and disappeared one by one. "Spectre status?" Turner asked, his voice calm. "The fleet is in chaos, Captain," Spectre reported. "Approximately 40% of their vessels are engaged in friendly fire. Casualties are mounting. Their command structure is collapsing." Brooks shook his head in disbelief. "They're tearing themselves apart. It's like they've lost their minds." Turner's expression remained cold and focused. "We're not done yet. Spectre, initiate the final phase. Overload their reactors." "As you command, Captain," Spectre responded. Its tendrils reached deep into the core systems of the Vexian ships, manipulating power distribution and pushing their reactors to critical levels. One by one, ships began to explode, their reactors pushed beyond their limits by Spectre's relentless assault. On the viewer, Frost watched in horror as his fleet unraveled. The invisible enemy had struck, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. On the Wraith, Turner allowed himself a tight smile. The ghost ship had done its job. The once proud Vexian fleet now resembled an undisciplined mess. Ships drifted aimlessly, their navigational systems down. Weapons fired erratically, often hitting nothing at all. Spectre's tendrils continued their work, sowing further confusion in the Vexian systems. On the VOR, Frost stared at the growing disorder on the tactical display, unable to believe his eyes. His once strong fleet was crumbling before him. The red icons flickered and blinked erratically as systems failed, and ships turned on each other. "Commander!" an officer shouted, his voice filled with panic. "We've lost contact with several cruisers, massive system failures. Navigation is down, and weapons are firing without command." Frost slammed a fist down on the console, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "How is this possible? Where is the attack coming from?" "We don't know, sir," another officer stammered, fear evident in his voice. "Our sensors detect nothing. No enemy ships, no electronic warfare. It's as if we're being attacked from within." "Then shut it down," Frost bellowed. "Isolate the infected systems and re-establish control." But as the words left his mouth, Frost knew it was too late. The ghost, or whatever it was, had struck, and the Vexian fleet was already falling apart from the inside. Aboard another Vexian destroyer, chaos reigned. The captain barked orders at his crew, but the bridge was a blur of panic, confusion, and failing systems. A cacophony of alarms filled the air, voices overlapping in panic. The ship's turrets had locked onto a nearby frigate, and despite the crew's frantic efforts to override the commands, the weapons fired, sending a volley of plasma rounds into the friendly vessel. "We're hit!" the frigate's captain shouted over the comms. "What the hell are you doing, Flynn Cross? You're firing on us! Stand down!" "We're not in control," Captain Ronan Pierce of the destroyer replied, desperation in his voice. "Something's taken over our systems. We're not the enemy." But it was too late. The frigate, assuming treachery, returned fire. targeting the destroyer with its own weapons. The Vaker Bridge was bombarded with reports of similar incidents across the fleet, ships firing on one another, captains turning against their comrades in confusion and fear. "High Commander, we're losing ships at an alarming rate," an officer reported, his voice trembling. "The fleet is falling apart." Frost's eyes blazed with a mix of anger and helplessness. "This is madness. We're being destroyed by an enemy we can't even see." On the Wraith, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. The crew watched the Vexian fleet disintegrate before their eyes. The tactical display now showed only a fraction of the red dots that had once represented the fleet. "They've turned on each other," Lieutenant Ava Mitchell said, her voice a mixture of pride and professionalism. "They have no idea what's happening. Spectre has completed the primary objective." "Perfect execution," Captain Leo Turner replied, his tone steady but tinged with hardness. "This isn't just about winning a battle, it's about breaking them, showing them their vulnerability." Sergeant Ian Brooks, usually the one to crack a joke in moments of tension, was silent as he watched the chaos unfold. "It's like watching a beast eat itself," he murmured. "We haven't even fired a shot and they're tearing each other apart." Turner's gaze never wavered from the display. "This is what happens when you let fear control you. They're fighting phantoms and it's destroying them." Despite the devastation unfolding on the Vexian side, the Wraith's crew remained detached, focused solely on their mission. They were executing flawlessly, and they knew that their job wasn't over yet. "Spectre, status report," Turner commanded. "Approximately 60% of the Vexian fleet has been incapacitated or destroyed," Spectre reported, its voice calm and devoid of emotion. "The remaining ships are in disarray, with significant internal conflict. Systems are failing across multiple vessels." "Keep pushing them," Turner ordered. "We need to finish this." Back on the Vaker, Frost stood on the verge of despair. His fleet, his pride, was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The bridge was chaos, officers shouting over each other, scrambling to regain control. But it was clear, the situation was beyond salvaging. The crew was utterly overwhelmed by the sudden ferocity of the attack. "High Commander, we have to retreat," one of his officers urged. "We can't fight an enemy we can't see. We need to regroup, find a way to counter this." "Retreat?" Frost snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. "Leave our ships to be slaughtered? I will not abandon my fleet." "Sir, if we don't pull back now, there won't be a fleet left to command," the officer insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. Frost hesitated, torn between his pride and the harsh reality. The fleet was disintegrating around him, and every moment they stayed, more ships were lost. His fists clenched, his body trembling with rage. "Order a retreat," Frost finally commanded, his voice low and filled with bitterness. "Get as many ships out as you can. We'll regroup and figure out what went wrong." The order was relayed, but it was already too late for many of the vessels. As the surviving ships attempted to disengage, Spectre struck again, targeting their thrusters and further disabling their systems. Ships that tried to flee found themselves trapped, their engines sputtering and failing. On the Wraith, the crew observed the Vexian retreat with a mixture of satisfaction and somber realization. The mission had been a success, but the cost to the Vexians was catastrophic. "They're running, Captain," Brooks noted, his voice grim. "But there's not much left to run with." Turner nodded, his expression unreadable. "We've done what we came to do. Spectre, begin withdrawal procedures. Let's disappear before they figure out what hit them." "As you command, Captain," Spectre replied, initiating stealth extraction protocols. The Wraith began to pull back, slipping away from the battlefield as silently as it had arrived. The Vexian fleet, now a graveyard of shattered ships and broken hopes, was left in disarray. Its commanders, struggling to comprehend the nightmare that had befallen them, couldn't understand what had happened, or who had made it happen. As the Wraith vanished into the void, Turner allowed himself a moment of reflection. The mission had been a success, but there was no joy in victory, only the cold satisfaction of a job well done. "Mission accomplished," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's hope they never forget what happened here." The Wraith continued its silent journey through the void, leaving the remnants of the Vexian fleet behind. The legend of the ghost ship would grow, fueled by the fear and confusion of those who had survived the encounter. And in the darkness of space, the Terrans would continue their fight, knowing that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one your enemy never sees.